Okay, so for the first time in my lifetime, Native communities across the country are actually working together. Now, you say a lot of this is, you think, due to the Harper government's policies?
In part. I mean, it's kind of a fire that's been lit under people by his actions, right? It's kind of forcing the situation to take it to another level. So yeah, it's partially his doing, but it's I mean, a lot of people are putting a lot of stuff just on Stephen Harper, but people have to be putting stuff on the government, and that includes liberals, that includes any other organization that had a political party that took power and formed the government. So Harper just happens to be part of a cabal of very right-wing people who have a right-wing agenda and have pushed the situation to where it is.
And is there something internally among the Native community nationally that took place that helped bring this about, do you think?
I think it was basically seeing that the way the Bill C-45 was structured to remove the protections from waters was something that was coming along a long way, and people have been seeing the deteriorating state of water in and around their communities. And some other groups of Indigenous people who live near large developments like the tar sands in Alberta have seen an extreme deterioration of their waterways due to that type of development. So upon reading what was going to be included in Bill C-45, I think that was a large part of people mobilizing to fight against that. I mean, there's an element within the Native community, for example, the Band Council government, that was more afraid of losing their jobs than defending things, and then the grassroots were worried about the waters. So this is a grassroots movement more than anything else.
Now, we've heard, obviously in the last few years with the Arab Spring and all that, we've heard a lot about the role of social media and technology in social movements, in gelling and mobilizing. Did that have a big part in the Idle No More?
Well, yeah, Idle No More started out as a hashtag on Twitter. So it is the same thing, right? I think we're in the age of internet revolutions, right? This is just to add to that, this is why governments like Canada, the United States, and Europe are working hard to regulate
through FIPA and other legislation like that.
Stuff like that. I mean, it may sound kind of odd, and there may be people who support it, maybe people who don't. But in Europe, they're working towards banning all pornography off the internet. Which is like whatever suits your fancy, whatever you're against or not. But it's not the fact that it's pornography that they're banning. It's the fact that they're banning anybody from saying things. It starts with that, and it moves to other things.
It starts with something politically easy.
Politically easy,
move
exactly.
On to social causes
sure.
And so on. Ideally, I'm assuming the ideal outcome here is when you decolonize, you're going to get rid of the last vestiges of us, which is the corruption.
Well, sure, but I mean, corruption's not, it's part of it, sure. There's a big issue within Indigenous communities, but that's part and parcel of the whole system that's developed and that's called Canada. It's based on a corrupt model.
So you feel once you remove a lot of the economic and governance models, the problem of corruption will not be as severe because the corruption does come out of the economic and governance models we've given.
Sure, it does, but at the same time, it's like, what do we replace that with, right? And who calls the shots in its replacement? If it's the same people calling the shots, then you're gonna have a corrupt system again.
I guess that's what I'm asking. Have you started to take steps toward talking about what are we going to do after?
Well, as a Mohawk, we've always had a different form of governance that was not that of a band council government. We've had a traditional government that has been running before the band council system, was a threat in the 1920s to the band council system because it refused to give way, was forcibly removed by the RCMP in the 1920s and Six Nations because it was a threat. And it continues to be a threat. And this is the government that people wanted to use, and this is the government that has a place for women that is equal to that of men, and this is what we want to model our governance on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, Mr. Ray.
My name is Khalsteelan Rivers. I come from the community in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, called Ekuanitshit, and I'm Squamish and Kwakwakiwak.
And now, You know, I'm 40 years old, and I have never seen the Native communities in this country act as one, ever. What do you think was the catalyst for this?
Well, I think that a lot of things are due to circumstance, and a lot of things are what precedes what's happening right now, especially with the context of Idle No More. A lot of it is the history of political activism and organizing that's been going on in a lot of communities for a long time. The other part of it is, I think that the way that this federal government and a lot of the provincial governments have been pushing and pushing and pushing First Nations into a corner more, that because of how the system has set up, that the young people and a lot of the people at the grassroots have finally said enough is enough, we've got to do something about it. And I think it started to create this kind of effect where, because of technology, communities were able to be inspired by each other very quickly, very rapidly, and then the information about what was happening was spreading really quickly and really rapidly. And so then as that took off, it just ballooned as communities were organizing, and eventually had hundreds of communities organizing events. And I think a lot of that had to do with kind of the context of organizing that has happened, but also kind of being inspired by each other as it was happening.
So technology has played a part, like it did in the Arab Spring and a lot of the other uprisings we've seen.
I think that there's something a little bit different about what's happened over the past few months because of technology. And I think theoretically, I mean, you think about other historical actions that have taken place, what it would have been like if technology had existed at that time. It might have been different, I don't know. But there is something about what's happening right now where the spread of information, the interconnection of organizers and groups and people, and the accessibility of that technology is making things different in terms of communicating, storytelling, documenting, and passing off of information.
Now, the Mohawk here still have retained a lot of their traditional governance, and they retained it, you know, throughout the history of our nation state, Canada here. You know, but as we traveled west, our treatment of Native people became worse and worse. As we got better technology, we relied less and less on the Native people. So by the time you get to BC, I mean, really, your systems of self-government have been absolutely smashed. Is there some work going on in your communities to try and rebuild or try and formulate? Yes? Okay.
There's definitely a conversation that's happening about how to irrelevantize, what I'm calling irrelevantize, which is like the verb form of making something irrelevant, of the quote-unquote Indigenous system, which is a system that's been imposed by the Canadian government kind of through this racist ideology of grouping and homogenizing all the different nations under one identity of being Indian. But what's happening, I think, is that conversation about how to decolonize and how to re-establish or recreate or resurgence of the traditional governments is happening. I think that I see it with a lot of the young people and younger generations that are kind of more removed from the residential school way of thinking, this kind of belief about these kind of colonized mentality about white is right and we have to be taken care of by our patriarchal government and things like that. And the young people are saying we have the teachings and the understanding of our traditional ways of being, and there's a way that we can make them relevant in our lives again. And I think that's starting to happen now. I think what happened in places like with the Mohawk communities is that they caught on to that idea much sooner. It was decades ago that they caught on to this idea. And so they laid the groundwork for back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which has brought them to this point now where they're much more rooted in that and they're much more widely used for their communities. So if you think about it, where we'll be in 30 years on the West Coast might be where the Mohawks are right now, in that sense of revitalizing these traditional governments.